This is Autoline After Hours, unscripted, uncensored, unapproved. Are you a podcast kind of person? Then look for Autoline After Hours, wherever you go for your favorite podcast.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Gary.
John, how are you?
Well, I was doing great until earlier this afternoon when I learned we lost our guest, John Smith, former head of Cadillac. He had an emergency that he had to take care of, and we'll have to reschedule him later, but kind of frees us up to do whatever the hell we want on the show.
Right. And I was going to point out that on September 1st, 1989, the first Lexus was sold. So, we were talking Cadillac and we're going to get a little bit of Lexus. And so, a little historical thing to start us off here, but
But
let's
hey,
roll with our colleagues.
Yeah, we've got backup here. We got muscle behind us. Let's bring them in. Michelle Krebs and Matt Delorenzo. Hey, you guys, thanks for being there for us.
Happy to be here.
Great to see you guys.
Yeah. Matt,
So,
I think
go ahead, John.
I think one great way to kick off the show is you wrote a book called How to Buy an Affordable Electric Car. Is there one?
Well, there is. And the subtitle of my book is A Tightwad's Guide to EV Ownership. And I recently retired from Kelley Blue Book, and I was like, well, I might need a car. I've been driving press cars a lot, and I thought, well, I may need to get a car of my own. And we already owned a plug-in hybrid, and I thought, well, why don't I try and get a used electric vehicle? I was a big fan of the e-Golf. And I'm also a cheapskate or a tightwad, and I've never spent, I don't think, before any more than $25,000 for a brand new automobile. And I found a Leaf for about $30,000. I'm eligible for a $7,500 tax credit and $2,750 in state rebates and carpool lane stickers. And I thought, well, why not? So I bought the car, and that became a big part of the book, that there are affordable electric cars out there. You just don't hear about them. There's about 8 models under $40,000.
So, Matt, you got this for about 20 grand or so?
Well, for 30 grand, I get the money back in pieces. I got $750 right when I purchased the car. It took about 6 months to get a $2,000 check from the state, and next year I get to take $7,500 off my federal income taxes. So that's how it pencils out. Yeah. So when you buy an electric car, it isn't, when they say, oh yeah, after the rebates and all this, it's only, no, you got to pop the full amount. And then, but I did, right before the gas prices spiked, I was able to get a 6-year 0% loan from Nissan. So I thought, why not? So it's, $350 a month. It only has 149-mile range. I don't drive particularly far. I charge at home. I have used fast charging out and about. But it's a great second car, and then plus we have the plug-in hybrid for road trips. So here in California, I think I'm pretty, especially now with the heat wave, and they say, don't plug in your electric car. There might be a blackout. So I think we got all bases covered.
So Matt, I've got to ask you, okay, when I first met you, you were Buff Book editor extraordinaire, driving exotic fast cars all the time.
Right.
How is the adjustment to driving a Leaf?
It's been great. I mean, they're fun cars to drive. An electric car has tremendous torque. It's great off the line. The Leaf is actually larger than the Bolt, so it's fairly comfortable inside. It's like a compact hatchback. And I've owned cars like it. I owned a Dodge. Like I said, I'm a cheapskate. I owned a Dodge Omni at one point, 4-door hatchback. I've had Accords and just all sorts of economy cars, and it's basically like driving an economy car. It's quiet. It's mainly quiet. The thing that really gets me is the noise it makes when it backs up, which is mandated. In the book, I describe it as sounding like a destroyer looking for submarines that are lurking below my driveway. And like when I got to leave really early in the morning, if I got something, I feel for my neighbors. But then my neighbor across the way got a RAV4 hybrid, and it's almost as obnoxious as my car when they're backing out of their driveway too. So,
Hey, Michelle,
it's
what
the
do you
new
make?
world we live in.
What do you make of what Matt just said of, here California is pushing people to buy electric cars. They want to ban the internal combustion engine, but don't plug it in. I mean,
well,
as you know, social media is going crazy over this today.
well, exactly. And I read a piece, because there's a heat wave in China as well, and they're not letting people charge their Teslas and Neos there. So because they're cutting back on their electric use. It's a question. The grid has been always been a question that I've had about where we go with electric vehicles. Matt also raised another interesting point that's the issue for me having an electric vehicle. I'm a one person, one vehicle household. Not going to work for me right now because, I make trips to Cincinnati and here and there. And I don't really want to spend the night charging in Findlay, Ohio. So I gotta have a car that does everything for me. We're just not there yet for people like me. And by the way, half the households in the US are, single owned, head of household, single person. And I don't know how many have just one car, but.
I'd like to raise a point about the ban on internal combustion cars. It's actually a requirement that manufacturers sell zero emission vehicles. So in that is they can sell up to 20% plug-in hybrid vehicles. So internal combustion is not going away.
Right.
Even the windmills have oil in them to lubricate. So if we want to go all natural, then we'll go back to killing sperm whales so that we can lubricate our wind turbines. So
Hey, that 20%, the PHEVs I read have to have a 50-mile range, pure electric. Is that
yeah,
right?
but I think that's where it's headed. I mean, you look at the Volt, which GM no longer builds, to their credit, got over 50 miles on pure electric. The RAV4 Prime is pretty close. It's at about 42. It's a doable thing, and it's great. I mean, the one we have a Ionic plug-in that gets 30 miles. We go to a gas station once every 2 months. We plug it in, we get 30 miles. If you're just going to the store, just bopping around town. So my advice to most people are like, well, I'm thinking of an electric car. And if you only have one car, get a plug-in hybrid. You're eligible. You're eligible for some rebates and stuff. And you're getting, you have that opportunity to minimize your gas use and have some electric experience.
So everybody's been stepping on Toyota because Toyota has been pushing things like plug-in hybrids and, reticent, it seems, in terms of EVs. So isn't this justifying what they're saying?
I agree. I think there's a lot of companies that are way out over their skis on the transition to EVs. And I think Toyota is closer to the voice of the customer by being in Plano, Texas, and they realize that the answer is all of the above. And if you look at their fleet, they have a fuel cell vehicle in the Mirai, they have plug-in hybrids, they have an electric car, they have regular hybrids, they have they have plug-in hybrids and they have regular ICE vehicles. So they understand that the right answer is all of the above, not one or the other.
And conversely, I think GM's interesting, not a single hybrid, not a single plug-in hybrid. And wow, I've always thought that was a pretty risky strategy if the whole EV thing doesn't quite work out.
I couldn't agree more. When they announced that they were getting out of hybrid technology, especially if you look at the people who own the Volt, they're like Saturn owners. They love them. Mm-hmm. They absolutely love them. And GM sits there and goes, well, yeah, we don't like this car.
No, we had Marco Royce on the show. Highest owner loyalty and the most enthusiastic GM buyers are both B&V, Bolt and Volt owners.
Right. Yeah. So
Michelle,
did he have I question. Did he have an answer for you about whether they would ever do a vehicle like that again?
No, they're all in EV. EV's the future, and that's the way that they're going. But I'd like to get your guys' opinion on this. I mean, clearly California has a problem with the grid. You know, I'm sitting here in Michigan. We have storms that come in and knock out electricity, but by and large, other than that, our grid's pretty robust. And I've talked to Consumers Energy and DTE, which are the two big energy providers in Michigan, the two big utilities. They're not worried about a whole bunch of EVs plugging in. In fact, they relish the fact that they're going to be able to sell a lot more electricity in the future. And they've got a 10-year plan of being able to put the capacity in there to handle a whole lot more EVs. So what do you guys think? Is California an outlier in this, or are we going to
How
run
about
into
Texas? Texas has had plenty of issues with its grid too.
Well, the thing is whether or not, like here in California, they have a law to where 30% now has to come from quote unquote sustainable sources like solar and wind. Michigan doesn't have that. Over the weekend, I saw Paul Gentilozzi. He's involved in people who just opened up a gas-fired power plant near Niles. And they're looking at buying a coal-fired plant and switching it over to natural gas. So who's
Gentilozzi?
He's ex-race car driver living up in Lansing and a very interesting character.
Michelle, go ahead.
Oh, well, no, I'm just saying that, if the state will welcome natural gas sourced or even nuclear, the grid's not going to be a problem. But the problem here is if you decide that you're going to, cover the desert with, thousands of electric or solar panels and try to put windmills everywhere, it's been proven that that's not as sustainable or reliable as proponents claim it is.
All right. So, Michelle, I was looking at some Cox numbers that you guys came out with. And, we're talking about EVs. And so it was looking at the top growth segments, June versus July. And I thought what was interesting is that, we're talking here about EVs and hybrids and things like that. And so there's a list of top 10, and then there's a list of the bottom 10. And among the bottom 10 are luxury electric SUVs and CUVs, electric cars, luxury electric cars, electric truck, hybrid car. And back at the top are things like normal midsize SUVs, compact SUVs, full-size trucks. I mean, what does the market look like in terms of these vehicles? I mean, it's one thing for us to talk, largely theoretically about it, except for Matt, who has one. But it seems that, from these numbers, things are switching back. I mean, gasoline is getting cheap, so people are like, I'll get that Silverado.
Well, let's see. It's really hard to say. This market's been so unusual. It's really hard to say anything that's absolute. So one of the things is, hybrid inventory has been the absolute lowest. If you looked at hybrid sales, they were down from last year. Well, the demand wasn't down, but the inventory was way down. And, small cars, we saw with gas prices go up, small cars were in way short supply. Demand was super high. We saw shopping for small cars, mid-sized cars go up. But it's starting to come back down now that gas prices come down. I don't know if that answered your question. You kind of bleeped out there for a minute. But a lot of it is so much reliant on the supply that's out there, which isn't much, and it isn't getting much better right now, unfortunately.
Well, what's your long-term outlook for EVs then? We're talking about all the problems with them, and here's an industry going head first into the EV segment.
I don't know if we have a specific, we rely on some other numbers for the percentages, but, we have seen it. It's up to about 6% of sales EVs, and with, I think, hybrids at about 10%. So it's growing. And, with regulations, it will grow, and incentives, it will. I couldn't put a number on it by a certain date. Things have happened that we didn't anticipate. I don't think any of us anticipated that the prices would get sky high and the cost would get sky high with precious metals, through the roof. So I think there's just a lot of wild cards, I think.
Matt, going back to your book, any other tips for people who are shopping for EVs?
Well, there's a couple of things. Like I mentioned, there are about 8 EVs under $40,000. Among them are the Bolt, Kona, Kia Niro. So there are some on the marketplace. The problem is that the new bill that they just passed kind of pulled the rug out under a couple of them. So they're making it more difficult for shoppers to figure out, what sort of credits I'm eligible for and what it's actually going to cost me out of pocket. So my advice is you really got to spend time on the internet, look at the inventory, look at what vehicles are out there, look at what you're going to pay for range. John, you're an ex-racer, and you know that the old saying was, how fast do you want to go? How much do you want to spend?
Yeah.
Well, in the EV world, it's how far do you want to go? How much do you want to spend? The difference between my base 149 mile Leaf S and a Leaf SV, which gets 225 miles, that's 75 miles of range, it's $5,000. So if you look at any of these so-called entry level between $40,000 and $50,000 mid-size SUVs, those are for the 250 mile range ones. Once you get an extended range, you're up over $50,000.
Mhm.
So to like Michelle's point, if you're going to rely on an EV as your own dedicated model, you're looking at spending what you would probably spend for 2 relatively inexpensive ICE cars just to have one that will get over 300 mile range, which I think you would need if you wanted to use it like a regular car, because a typical car will go between 300 and 400 miles on a tank of gas. If you want an electric vehicle that will perform the same, you're looking at over $50,000.
And with a gas car, you can just pop into any gas station, fill it up in
Correct.
5 minutes, and be on your merry way. Yeah, we're not
Exactly.
there yet. I think there will be a day that the charging infrastructure is there. It's just not there yet.
Or
Yeah.
just, do consumers have to rethink how much range do they really need? I mean,
Well, I think that's it. Yeah.
I mean, certainly some are going to need that kind of range. If they're towing, they drive long distances, blah, blah, blah. Can consumers be convinced to rethink what they really need? Is it possible to get, I mean, Matt, you did it. You got, what'd you say, 140 mile range or something like that?
Yeah, 150.
Can you convince your neighbors that that's all they need to?
Well, that's a line I have in the book when I start. The second chapter of my book is on range, because that's the biggest thing. Everybody is talking about that. And there's a difference between the range you want and the range you need. And it goes back to ownership patterns. If you have 2 cars, you got another car, you don't need a lot of range. You can make an electric vehicle work as a part of your daily fleet, especially if you don't have a particularly long commute, especially if you have access to level 2 charging at home. So
Or
there
at
are a
work.
lot of,
Or at work.
or at work, and you don't have to line up or schedule time on the charger, but you can make it work. So it's a viable transportation alternative, and it can be an affordable, viable transportation alternative. It's just not the sole transportation alternative at this point. And a lot of things are going to have to happen, like battery chemistry is going to have to change. Charging times are going to have to come down. The cost curve definitely needs to be bent down. In the book, I compare 2 vehicles, Kona, gas Kona, same trim level, EV Kona. There's a $10,000 price spread. That's the cost.
So
of
what's
battery.
so what's the advantage for someone not to buy the gas Kona? I mean, so if you have a situation where you're driving a minimal amount on a daily basis, and that means you're buying a minimal amount of gasoline, and even if it's at California prices, I'm sure that if you penciled it, it'd take a long time before you hit that $10,000 delta.
Well, yes or no. I mean, the question is, at $6 a gallon gas, that delta isn't as insurmountable as it may first appear. The other things that you have to take into consideration is that you were, up until a month ago, eligible for tax incentives that take a bite out of that. You still are eligible for up to $2,750, so that you're down to a spread of $7,200. And when you had the $7,500 credit, it was a push. The other thing is that in addition to the fuel savings, you don't have to get oil changes. If you have home solar already, and that's another point I make in the book, you don't buy an electric car and say, oh, I'm going to get home solar and that'll help. No, you're going to be spending $30,000 on home solar. So, but if you have it already, if you've made the conversion already, having an electric vehicle is not a bad way to go, because you're paying less for your electricity. So anytime that you can knock that down, it knocks down your operating costs. Your insurance costs are going to be a little bit higher. Maintenance costs lower. So it depends on how far you drive and how much you need the car for. An EV can be a lower cost alternative than a comparable electric car. In a pure unsubsidized world, it's not going to work. But as long as there are tax breaks and things that you can take advantage of, it is workable.
I think what's going to be interesting, though, is you have to do so much research. And I think your book's very timely on this, and it's only going to get more complicated as all of those tax credits come into play, and the changing of, the batteries and the battery chemistry and where the minerals come from. It's just mind boggling in terms of how complex it is. And then it's not only about the car, but about limits on the car, cost of the car, and then limits on the income that are eligible for those. It's just wildly complicated.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten in it. Well, you mentioned a little bit about the battery, where they source it, and right now it's like 40%, but it ramps up very quickly to 100% right, to where they want the battery packs sourced and built in the U.S. or free trade partners. So we could find that within, if their whole idea was we got to get people in electric cars by giving them tax breaks, within 5 years, if no cars are eligible for the tax breaks, and you've defeated the purpose. So there's a lot of unintended consequences to this that I don't think people have figured out, and we'll see how it plays out. It's not going to, we're not going to be in an all electric future by 2035.
Well, I think what happened with the IRAs is that basically the previous 7,500 was to get people into EVs. The new tax regime is basically industrial policy,
right,
and it's meant to reward people who build factories. And in terms of the consumer, well, sorry about that, guys, but if you want money from Uncle Sugar, then this is what you got to do, okay? But it would seem to me that if you look at situations like, look at Tesla sales, after they lost their 7,500, they didn't seem to fall off precipitously.
But they're luxury cars.
Yeah, they're a luxury good. Actually, they're. I don't consider them. Two people buy Teslas. One is that they really believe in electric cars, and that's the way to go. The other ones are like, I got to have the latest iPhone. That's those people. So, earlier the point was made about just trying to get affordable ones out there and teaching people, you only need 150-mile range. It's the second car in the fleet, that kind of stuff. If you recall, our auto industry was built on the back of the Model T and not the Cadillac. And all I see, and I make this point, I say, this reminds me of like the 1950s, with big flashy cars coming out with these unbelievable sticker prices that the average motorist can't afford. And then along came the Beetle with the greatest tagline, think small. And I think that's where we have to be thinking, if we're talking about affordable EVs, is thinking small, saying you only need 200 miles of range. You don't need an SUV. You don't need a pickup truck electric. You need a compact sedan or a hatchback that can go 200 miles and cost less than $40,000. But we're not seeing it. We're not seeing
Matt,
it.
You're defining the sales-proof car in America. When you start telling people,
talking about unintended consequences, we all know why pickup trucks and SUVs are so popular today, and that's CAFE. because back in the day when they got rid of the body on frame V8 station wagon and a full-size sedan, the market flipped. It went to get into those types of vehicles that happened to be trucks. So
Yeah,
here
but
we are.
yeah, that's right. But Americans have always wanted big cars. I mean, by and large, small cars have not done all that well here. There's been some, blips on the scale, like the Volkswagen Beetle, and there was a time when the Honda Civic was red hot. But by and large, Americans want big vehicles. So many Americans are of a size that's the only thing they're going to fit in, or they've got enough family members that they want to travel in comfort. What we need is like a $25,000 electric Suburban. That's what Americans want. An electric Suburban that goes 500 miles and costs $25,000 and burns rubber all the way across the intersection. That's what Americans want.
Okay. Can anybody explain to me the logic of an electric pickup? Go.
Fleets, corporate fleets. I could see that. They have a certain, routine there. You can plan the charging. Of course, there's also tax benefits for that will come about, but that's how I think we forget about the whole fleet business, and that's going to grow.
Yeah. I totally agree, Michelle. I think we're going to see the commercial side of the industry switch over to electric on a percentage basis, not in total raw numbers, but on a percentage basis, going to flip over far, far faster than the pass car or the light pass car and truck side.
Which makes a lot of sense. It's a whole lot of bang for your buck if you want to eliminate emissions. Sell a whole bunch to a commercial fleet instead of trying so hard to sell one individually to individual consumers. It just is that's the fleet side has always made sense to me on that.
But I think that's a lot of people are poo-pooing hydrogen, and I think that's where hydrogen fuel cells.
I agree.
In the commercial, the whole over the 18-wheeler over the road big rigs, those things should be fuel cell electric vehicles.
Totally agree.
Electric vehicles, because you're hauling around all these batteries. I mean, basically, the battery is a storage system for energy. It's not powering the vehicle.
Yeah, right. But we just did a show with Navistar. They're actually very bullish on electric semis, more for short haul than long haul. But they said in the next 5 years, we're going to see electric semis, 500-mile range, very, very competitive with diesels. In fact, they're saying total cost of ownership is going to be lower. And they say, remember, so far, all the electric trucks that we've seen are just existing frames where they gutted it of their diesel, right, stuff it full of batteries. They told me even semi-trucks are going to go to skateboards.
Yeah, but I'm skeptical, because if you look at the towing performance of the F-150 and all these electric pickup trucks, the idea behind a semi is to pull something. And if you're pulling a lot of weight, that kills your range. So I don't know what magic batteries these guys have. And that's why I think a fuel cell makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I'll just make these points. I'm not exactly, arguing with you on it. But have you guys looked at the total drivetrain of a Class 8 semi? Diesel? Holy crap, is it big and heavy? I mean, you're probably looking at 12,000 pounds of drivetrain. And so, the batteries are still heavier, but net of net, it's not, it's not 20,000 pounds heavier to have an electric vehicle semi.
All right, Matt, I'll validate you. Sorry, John, I'm going to validate Matt on this. Okay, so basically, this week, Bosch announced it's investing $200 million in its plant in South Carolina to build fuel cells. Okay, and Mike Mansuetti, who runs Bosch in North America, said we are all in on developing fuel cell technology, including for mobile applications. This past spring in Germany, when they were holding a technical conference, this guy named Dr. Marcus Hein, who's a member of the Bosch Board of Management, said that they intend to have the cost of fuel cells for Class 8 trucks to be at parity with the cost of diesels by 2030. So these guys are going to make that happen.
That's pretty significant. And it, this comes back to what we were talking about earlier of commercial fleets going electric faster. Same thing with hydrogen fuel cells. You can set up fuel cell stations along driving routes far, far easier than trying to put them everywhere for everybody to use, and just size the trucks to be able to go from one station to the next.
Well, we already have an infrastructure of diesel fuel truck stops, and that's really, if you look back on a diesel car adoption in the U.S., I mean, originally you had to go to a truck stop if you bought some early diesels to get fuel. Now it's available at a lot of gas stations. I think the same model may follow hydrogen.
Yeah. Hey, look, we got to take a quick commercial break. We got a lot more to talk about here, but let's roll in those commercials for the people who are paying for their show.
How do Bridgestone tires stop shorter on wet roads? It's their HydroTrack technology. But you don't have to know how the science works, just where the brake is. What really matters is their Bridgestone.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what BorgWarner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry.
And we're back.
So I wanted to ask you guys about, you were talking earlier about affordable vehicles versus, very expensive electric vehicles. And so Mercedes came out today with a number for the EQS SUV. So it starts at what I would say hefty, $104,400 and goes up to $132,200. Is that just because it's Mercedes?
Yeah, because they can get that kind of pricing. I mean, look, the car companies have been astonished over the last 2 years how much they've been able to raise prices and still have people standing in line waiting to get them. And it's especially true of EVs. And it gets back to what Michelle was talking about before of inventory is so tight. People will stand in line to get it, even as they keep raising prices. I mean, there's got to be a price point at some point where we're going to hit the ceiling, but we haven't found that yet.
Our view of what's happening in the U.S. auto market is there's a shrinking pool of people who can afford new vehicles, period. So many people have completely dropped out of the market. They simply can't. I mean, the average car price is record for over $48,000. The average household income is what, 65, 70, something like that. That math just does not work. So we just see that pool shrinking. Yes, they can go to the used car market. Interestingly, we're seeing people with a lot of money go to the used car market too right now because there is availability of vehicles. But I do wonder long term, how do much less well-off people afford transportation, especially in a country that doesn't have, much in the way of public transportation? So I think that's a bigger societal question. I sound like the bleeding heart liberal that I am, but I think it's an issue.
It is an issue. And, this is why I'm actually bullish on micro mobility, because I totally agree with you, Michelle. We have priced just since the year 2000, we've priced something like 5 million households out of the new car market for the very point you raised. They can't afford it.
Mm-hmm. But, isn't it, Matt, when you were describing earlier about, this ideal electric car and what the ideal vehicle isn't, you were basically saying, well, you don't want SUVs, you don't want pickup trucks. And, those two types of vehicles where the car companies are largely making up their margins compared to anything else. And what I wonder is, we see announcements almost every day. I mean, the aforementioned Toyota has kicked in more money for its battery plant. And, Honda has announced it's going to be spending with LG, like $4.4 billion on battery. So where are these car companies getting all of this money that they're investing in things like battery plants, and they're investing this money and they're not going to be getting a return on those plants for, 2 or 3 years, if even then.
Well, that's where I feel that's, like I said earlier, some of the companies are a little out over their skis on this one. I think they're diverting a lot of money from ICE development. Um, and I think that that's been a real challenge also. Everybody talks about bending the curve, the cost curve down on batteries, and economies of scale will help the price come down. But now we're learning, oh no, raw material prices are going up, so the cost curve isn't bending down as quickly on battery technology. And then at the same time, internal combustion engines have been getting better and better and better. You can get into a car, non-hybrid, that gets 50 miles to the gallon. So the ICE technology is a moving target, but as they begin to pull dollars away from that, I think that's what they're hoping, is that stabilizes, and then this new market for EVs opens up and replaces ICE technology. But I pity the fool that stops investing in ICE technology, because in 10 years, they could find themselves at a real competitive disadvantage if somebody decides to change the rules again, which could happen.
That's a critical point. If we get a new administration in the US in 2024, all this could change. But I'll say this. Look, Honda's going to get the money for that battery plant because it's going to cut back in other places. And I'm not sure if it's going to be on the ICE side of the business yet, but it's going to cut back. And, look at a couple of other things. Navistar, I mentioned them earlier. They just introduced their last diesel engine ever. It's superb. It's a brilliant piece of engineering. They're not going to do anything with it from now on. Everything goes electric. And even more importantly, I think, look at what Renault just did, or announced it's going to do. Spin off its piston engine business. Right. They're putting it in a standalone company that they're calling Horse. The BEV side is called Ampere, the ICE side called Horse. And Geely announced it's interested in investing in Renault's piston engine business. And remember, Volvo already spun off its piston engine business. Geely snapped that up. I can see what the next step is. Geely's going to put Renault and Volvo engine operations into one unit and get all kinds of manufacturing scale. And they're going to be in a pretty good position, and at least in terms of riding the ICE into the sunset.
John, we're all old enough to remember when the last convertible was built in 1976. And it was a Cadillac Eldorado.
Touche, man.
Never say never. And that's the point I have. There's going to be a mix of technology, and everybody who says it's going to be one or the other is just blowing smoke. And the reason is, it's a three-legged stool. You have the manufacturers, you have the government, and you have the consumers. And if the consumers aren't going to have electric vehicles or can't find a way to afford an electric vehicle, that stool falls over. And okay, they're all banned. Look at Cuba. People are going to hang on to their internal combustion engine cars. You're not building any new cleaner ones. Household fleets are going to grow because people will have a gas engine car, an electric car, maybe a hybrid. There'll be more cars on the road. There'll be a lot more dirtier cars on the road because they can't replace their older, dirtier cars with new ones. This is the law of unintended consequences all over again.
And they last a whole lot longer. People, they're
do.
lasting over, the average age is over 12 years. I predict too, when some of these laws go into effect, you're going to see a big surge on people buying gas-powered engines and just holding on to them. Plus, we're going to have them in the fleet for another 40 years. So at least.
So, isn't the question though that an OEM has to look globally, and as you look globally, whatever happens in terms of our administration, the European Union is fully committed to moving forward towards banning the internal combustion engine. So back to the three-legged stool, that's one leg of the global stool. China, it needs to have new energy vehicles if those people want to continue to breathe. So that's two legs of the stool. And America is, and if you look at the numbers of EV sales, you were saying earlier, what, 6% or something like that? I mean, look at Europe. It's like over 20%. And, it's expected that in Europe, it's actually going to be a higher percentage than it will be in China. So, I mean, if you're a global manufacturer and you're looking at the scene like that, you're saying, well, maybe this is what we have to do. This is what we have to invest in, because that is what the market will require.
Gary, how many cars does GM sell in Europe right now?
Fair point.
Yeah, but they want to get back in.
Of course they do.
And that's GM, but then you got to ask how many cars does GM sell in China? And
yeah, that's a different.
If you're going to be a global player, to Gary's point, you got to have scale. And the only way to get the cost down in EVs, there's a number of ways, but the surefire way is to have more scale. And here's the other thing, as EV sales come up, 20% in Europe with new energy vehicles, over 20% in China, 6% in the US, although that's going to jump dramatically in the next 2 years. I was talking to a supplier that sells drive shafts, has like 100% of F-150 business, supplies 750,000 drive shaft sets to Ford every year. He said, as that market comes down to 500,000 a year, says, you think I'm going to sell them the same price? Says, no way. If I'm selling 750,000, the volume drops to 500,000. I have no choice. I have to raise my prices. So what he's arguing is that the delta gap between the cost of EVs and ICE vehicles is going to shrink because ICE costs are going to come up as EV costs come down.
All I can say is transitions are really hard, and this is going to be a bumpy ride, and there's going to be winners and losers, big time.
So who do you think the winners and losers will be? Come on, let's dish. Come on.
Oh, I don't know that I know exactly, but I think the interesting thing, I looked back, everybody thought, oh, the legacy automakers, they're just not going to cut it. All these EV startups, I'm like, don't count them out. And now look who's out trying to get more money, and they're having all kinds of problems. And so it's not clear.
I think the winners are going to be the people who hedge their bets.
Yeah.
Ford is hedging big time. They invested in Cleveland. They're going to be building gas engines through 2040. Their big sellers are the Bronco and F-150. They're heavily committed to electrics, but they're not giving up on ICE technology. I think Toyota is going to be a big winner. Mm-hmm. I think the ones placing the major, like VW, GM, they are, I think they're more vulnerable because they're kind of pushing the chips all in on that one technology, and it could bite them. We don't know what the market's going to look like in 5 years.
Is it possible that their rationalization, I mean, in the case of General Motors, I don't know about Volkswagen, that their rationalization is that they just basically become a different kind of company, and it's not a company that's predicated solely on putting out vehicles. And what was that number that was being estimated for services by 2030? I mean, it was
crazy,
something like $30 billion or something like that. I mean, okay, if
turn into a software company, and delivering services.
Believe that when I see it.
Yeah, look at how well did that work out for BMW, trying to get people to subscribe to heated seats.
Yeah.
Well, there's that situation with OnStar where purchasers of Buicks, GMCs, and Escalades get this optional
$1,500. Yeah, OnStar.
The non-optional option. So there's revenue.
Gary, what do you make of that?
But some of that may change because of the inventory situation we're in now. I mean, they can force that now, but they may get some pushback after that.
Gary, what do you make of that? Of GM putting that $1,500, and instead of just baking it into the standard equipment, they had it on the sticker as a standalone option, but you could not delete it. You had to go, what do you think they should have done?
I think they should have baked it into the price of the vehicle. I mean, if they wanted to get that extra money, I don't think that they should necessarily say to their consumer that, okay, you have to have this. And, and whether you even use it or not, you're still going to be paying for it. It seems crazy to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People
But,
don't
Matt,
like to
as
be
you
told
say,
what to do.
as you were saying, Matt, about the heated seat sort of situation and being an option. Part of the thing you think about it is that, okay, that's hardware that's built into the car that exists as it is. If you get an OnStar unit, again, that's hardware. I could see them saying, okay, if we're going to be sending you an over-the-air update to update your map system or an over-the-air update to provide some functionality, I could see you, charging for that. I mean, the same way that if you buy an app for your phone, you're purchasing it, right?
Right, but I think we're entering really an interesting territory here over who owns the car,
Yes.
who owns the software. This brouhaha over Tesla turning off, full self-driving after the original owner paid for it and resells the car. I just think that's going to be a huge, huge battleground as we get into the software and technology and services side of the business. And it could actually work against some manufacturers with somebody saying, I want to buy and I want to own my car. I want to have the pride of ownership and this is my car, not it's still partly owned by the manufacturer. And I think that's a real concern. I was at a Toyota or a Lexus program, and they kept referring to their customers as guests. Now, you mentioned earlier about the 30th anniversary of starting Lexus. That was their original. They wanted their dealers to treat their customers as guests, which was a great concept at the time when they were starting it. If as an internal measure of how you treat people, I don't think that works on a B2C, like calling me a guest. That doesn't say I have any loyalty to you. It's like I'm renting a room for the night or I'm getting a rental car. There's no pride of ownership. There's no, I would rather be a loyal customer than a guest.
Yeah.
The other thing that everybody's going to have their hand out on these subscription services. I mean, I don't know if you saw the piece last week, but Apple basically wants to own the whole, dashboard. They want a piece of the action too. I think there are going to be some wicked fights about who owns that, who gets the revenue from it. I think these estimates that they're going to make these billions of dollars are just crazy.
I'm waiting for the manufacturer to come in and sell a car with knobs and analog gauges and no connectivity. That's and cheap. I'm a tightwad. So
Matt,
they'll sell, bring back the VW Beetle.
I think your age is showing.
It is. Get off my lawn.
No, I mean, part of the thing is, think about it. If you're a young person and you're growing up in in an entirely different world where cars are, whatever the Uber happens to be to come pick you up or Lyft or what have you, and you don't really have this same sense of ownership of the vehicle. If you're trading in your, let's face it, we used to use phones as like, well, you change them all the time, but they're cheap. It doesn't matter. Well, no, they're not cheap anymore, and they're expensive, and people still keep changing them. As you said earlier, the person who needs the earliest iPhone, and you probably wrote your book on Microsoft Word. You don't own that. You have a license,
right,
with Microsoft, right? And so I'm sure that people in Dearborn or Auburn Hills or downtown Detroit are saying, if Microsoft can sell licenses to people for their programs, we should be able to do the same thing. And when you, Matt, no longer have that legally, that's theirs. It's not whoever you hand the computer to.
Yeah, but I don't turn my computer into valet parking. There's a thing called pride of ownership that I still think exists, and that's one of the things that differentiates an automobile from a piece of consumer electronics. Is there still remains pride of ownership. Design is very important. Comfort is very important. and that type of experience is totally different than using an iPhone or watching a 80-inch screen television. That's just my view. But
I don't know. I think cell phones are very much a status item. I think people
Well, they
are
are.
proud to sit down at a bar or a restaurant or with friends and put their latest phone out on the table, so that everybody sees they've got they're proud of that too.
yeah,
I mean, I would agree that, it's not quite the same as pride of ownership in an automobile, but for a lot of people, it's the surrogate. Okay, so here's a question for you guys. We talked about electric versus ICE and plug-in and hybrid and fuel cell. What about e-fuels? I was interested this week, in fact, just yesterday, Oliver Bloom, the new head of Volkswagen, the new CEO there. Remember, the old CEO got fired because he was pushing too fast to go into electric cars and warned the union he was going to get rid of 30,000 line workers. They made sure he got the HEV. But the new guy, Oliver Bloom, says he's going to keep the pedal to the metal here on EVs. But he also said he's very interested and supportive of e-fuels, which Porsche is totally behind. What do you guys think? Is there any future of e-fuels?
well, that Bloom came from Porsche, so that's why he'd be bullish on e-fuel. And I think that that's the big loophole in the so-called ban in California, because it requires zero emission vehicles. And if an e-fuel qualifies as a zero emission vehicles, internal combustion lives. And I think that that's one of the things that people forget. We've been through this movie before. Back in the 1990s, California required by 2003 that 10% of the manufacturers had to sell zero emission vehicles. Well, when it became apparent that they weren't going to be able to meet that, all of a sudden, all these little like backdoor things started happening. CNG was accepted as a zero emission vehicle. Flex fuel vehicles were accepted as ultra low emission vehicles. And they generated,
PZEV. Remember
Right.
PZEV, partial
Right.
zero emission.
and they generated the credits the manufacturers needed to keep selling their ICE vehicles. So what's to say that same scenario can't play out using either internal combustion engines burning hydrogen or any other kind of e-fuel?
So arguably e-fuel is predicated on using green hydrogen to produce it, okay, to truly be. So why not just use the hydrogen?
Because I'll tell you why. We have a great infrastructure already set up to move liquid fuels. And yes, you can chill hydrogen, but then you got to get down to like near cryogenic temperatures to be able to do that. But that's one of the issues with hydrogen is we don't have a big infrastructure to move it around, at least not yet.
Well, so yesterday, if Bloom is talking about e-fuels, yesterday BMW also announced that they're on their next generation of fuel cell vehicles, and they're putting a fleet out to test these. So one German company is saying e-fuels, the other German company is saying fuel cells. And oh, by the way, they're both aggressive in electric cars as well. So maybe
Again,
this goes
not
to the,
just one solution.
exactly. It's the spreading
Hedging the
it
bets.
across. Yeah.
I think to your point, John and Gary, about the e-fuels is currently the fuel cell electric vehicles, they have it's pressurized gas, and they have tanks that are at charged at 10,000 psi. So they've been able to do it. I mean, you can refuel. It's a little, you got to be trained. You got to know what you're doing to refuel things like the Mirai and the Nexo. The advantage of the e-fuel is that if it's in a liquid state and includes other things that still don't produce carbon dioxide. So that's the thing, is that they don't have to pressurize it. They can use existing pumps, and it's like using gas, basically.
Look, this is what held back natural gas powered vehicles and propane powered vehicles. The gas tank is so bloody expensive.
And heavy.
And heavy and takes up all kinds of room because it's got to be in a tank form. But
Companies like Farisha's getting very clever making these composite tanks. It's not a problem. They're very light. They're very capable.
Right. But, when it comes to crashes, your entire fuel system has to be like the Rock of Gibraltar. It's got to take front impact, side impact, rollover, rear impact, all that kind of stuff. And so it's got to be so robust. It's so expensive. I mean, typically, LNG fuel tank was something like $10,000. It was like a battery. That's what killed it. The fuel tank. Anybody who can figure out a cheap fuel tank for hydrogen, propane, or natural gas can buy their own private island.
They've been trying for a long time.
Yeah, they have.
Well, the thing about the crash worthiness of hydrogen, there's also the crash worthiness of lithium ion batteries and compromising the because that electrolyte is mean stuff. I'm the big breakthrough everybody's waiting for is solid state, and it's always seems to be 5 years off. But I think that will go a long way to solving a lot of the fire issues and the recharging issues and that we currently face with lithium ion batteries, because that electrolyte is pretty wicked stuff. But.
So how do we get from where we are now to this solid state battery point in time? I mean, because we've got to traverse this.
There's a lot of manufacturers are investing in that. Like Toyota's working on it. They say they're going to have one by next year, and Volkswagen's a big player in that. So we'll see. I mean, I'm anxious. I'm not. I like the fact that there's multiple technologies. I think that there couldn't be a more exciting time to be in the auto industry than right now, because not since the dawn of the industry have we had like 5 different technologies vying for relevance and dominance, like the gas engine had, at the early 1900s. So there's a lot of cool cars out there. I like driving my electric car. It's fun. So I can't wait to see what's next. Maybe nuclear.
That's right.
Flux capacitor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's right. Well, garbage would be a good start.
Yeah.
If we could only run everything on garbage, wow, we'd solve everything.
Yeah.
Hey, look, guys, we're just about at the top of the hour. Probably a good time to wrap this up. So, Michelle Krebs, Matt Delorenzo, thanks for joining us today. Great to have you guys on the show.
It's fun being here. Thanks.
Real good. And Gary, I'll see you again next week.
Okay.
Good.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.